Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. All right, we are back again. We just keep rolling with all of these amazing stories and storytellers. And so I'm back again with another episode of Off the Comma. Very excited for this week because I continue to meet and interview and interact with all of these new folks who are coming into my circle. And so I'm very excited about that. It's certainly no shade to all of the people that I already know, who sometimes I know a little bit about their story, but this has been really cool to be meeting a lot of new folks. And this week, we're going to be talking to Pete Alexander. I'm going to introduce him in just a second. Also someone who I get the pleasure of meeting for the very first time during our conversation today. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing his story, learning about him, and adding him obviously to our collection of storytellers and stories, but also continuing the connection that will go on from here. So I ramble like this all the time, Pete. I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to hand it over to you. And before we get into your story, let's get to know you a little bit. Pete, tell us, how would you like to be known? And then share with us anything that you'd like us to know about you.
Sure. Well, Paul, first of all, thank you for having me on your great show, and I really appreciate your listeners' time as well. You know, I like to be, from an adjective standpoint, I'd like to be remembered as somebody who's humorous, who is dependable. Those are the two that I really like to kind of put my stake in the ground with, because most people who get to meet me get that sense and know that I'm always somebody who's on time and does what I say I'm going to do. And I usually try and find light in the situation as much as possible with some humor. From a professional standpoint, boy, I'm grateful to have several things that keep me busy. First and foremost, I'm the president of what I call the greatest interior landscaping company in the San Francisco Bay Area, Office Plants by Everything Grows. In addition, I've served as an adjunct professor with several universities over the years, and I've helped inspire thousands of students to develop and apply key concepts of marketing specifically to their area of interest. I'm also a TEDx speaker, best-selling author on reducing stress in your everyday life, as I unfortunately learned the hard way that trading your career or trading your health for your career is a very bad trade. And lastly, but certainly not least, I like to do volunteer work supporting the causes and organizations that I believe in, and that includes running laughter yoga classes and performing improv comedy to help my community laugh more and stress less. So that's kind of about me.
Nice. Well, and so many things in here I especially can relate to and appreciate the central theme of humor and laughter and bringing lightness into your relationships with people. I'm hoping we'll see and hear a little of that in your story today too. No pressure.
No
right?
pressure. No, but I'll be very serious.
Nice. And like so many folks that we tend to interview here, who have their own experiences with being stuck and getting unstuck, you've been involved in a number of different things and a number of different capacities too to contribute to your life's experience. So I'm anticipating that we're going to hear that come into your stories as well.
Sure, it will. It will indeed.
Nice. Pete, one of the things that we do before we get into the podcast, as I do with all guests, I'll ask these 5 questions that will provide the framework for the episode. And we'll get into those in just a minute. But as you think ahead to the next 40 or 45 minutes or so that we'll be talking and that you'll be sharing your story, more importantly, what intention would you have for yourself today in sharing your story?
I think, what I always hope that comes out of sharing the story is that even if one person hears it and goes, oh boy, I'm heading that same road, that slippery slope, and I need to do something before I end up with something that's going to be more damaging to my health. And that, I wish I would have heard that back in, well before my incident where what happened to me. So, what ends up happening is that people too often think, oh, it won't happen to me. And then it
Mm.
does. So if sharing my story can help others avoid the consequences of trading your health for your career, I think then I would have scored a touchdown to be able to do that.
I hear that. And I want to support, my intention is to support you and your intention to create a container, a safe space for you to be able to share your story today. And exactly what you just described is that my hope, as with all guests, is that someone out there listening to your story will see and hear a little bit of themselves in you and your story. They'll feel a little bit more connected, a little bit less alone. And in the best of cases, feel a little bit more inspired and empowered to perhaps do something in their lives that they've secretly been wanting to do, or maybe even not so secretly.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
nice. Well, I'm excited to hear your story. So let's jump into it. Pete, the first question I always ask is, where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
Where do we have? This is only a how long of a podcast do we have, Paul?
Right. I know there's never enough time. And so many people acknowledge like sitting on commas, walking on commas, living on commas, many commas, right? You get to pick and take us where you want. But yeah.
The first one that comes to my mind, um, really that was when um back it was November 7th, 1990.
Mm.
And the reason I remember that date specifically is because that was the day I walked into my very first adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional meeting, of families meeting. And the reason why that was such a comma moment for me is that up until that point, with the horrible dysfunction that I dealt with as a child and the stress associated with that, I walked into that meeting because I was in a men's group. There was somebody that was in AA who knew about the program and knew about my background and said, you ought to go to it. And so every quarter we would set a goal for certain things that we wanted to accomplish. And I finally decided, okay, I'll go to one meeting. And 5 minutes into that first meeting, I went, oh my gosh, there's other people who understand how I feel. And to your point earlier about someone feeling alone,
Mm.
and that's exactly what I felt like when I was growing up. The dysfunction, everything that was going on, the alcoholism, the drug use, all of that. I became a very good liar to my friends because I tried to cover it all up. And I just figured that, gosh, why am I the only one that has to deal with this kind of craziness?
Mm.
And once I walked into that program, I thought, wow, there's something here. And not only did it help me start to like myself, because I didn't like myself I always my favorite holiday, and it still is to this day, but my favorite holiday was always Halloween because it was the one day of the year that I didn't have to be me. And so,
Mm,
so I learned to like myself, and then I learned to love myself in that program. And I basically owe that program my life. I've been, I spent 33 years in that program. Um, and actually longer than that. It's now because this is 2024, so it's 34 years in the program.
mm, mm,
And I'm so grateful for it. I've sponsored a ton of people who've needed the support to get through it as well. And when I used to share my story in those meetings, and those meetings were either small ones with, five, six, seven people, and I had other ones where it was these big retreats where I'd have 200 people in the audience, and
mm,
never failed that when I started getting into the details of what happened to me as a kid, that you could hear the pin drop in the room.
mm,
And so that if I was to say one comma moment, that absolutely was it. And it's funny because before I walked into that room, all I was doing was walking in there. I'm saying, okay, I'm going to just check off my goal that I need to accomplish, this goal that I committed to in the men's group. Little did I know that it would be a life-changing event.
So you're describing this experience that really sounds like it was quite transformative in your life. I mean, and has been for well over
Mhm.
30 years now. And it sounds like to me, and again, I'll reflect things back, Pete, from time to time, or I might share kind of what I see in it. Always correct me if I'm off base. It seems like that was sort of the coming off of the comma at that point.
Ye- Yes, at least it enlightened
Mm,
me, but there was a heck of a lot of work that had to come after
mm,
that. But the reason I use it as the comma moment is because up until that point, as a teenager, how teenagers, they know everything. And I was in my, let's see, 1990, so I was 25. And um, I didn't listen to anybody still. I was still a teenager by heart. And this was the first time that something resonated so well with me
mm.
that I thought, wow, um, I really have to take pause and really soak this in. And lo and behold, thinking that all I had to do was go to one meeting and that would check off my goal.
Mm.
And next thing I know, I'm going to multiple meetings a week because I became a sponge of information to try and figure out what could I do to help overcome this. And what was interesting before that, um, I had this I had this realization even before I had committed to that quarterly goal. I remember I was dating different women, and I never would have a relationship that lasted more than a couple of months at the
Mhm.
most. And every time something strange would go on in the relationship, and I'm strange where it's just like it completely goes off the rails for some reason. And I remember the last one that I was dating, and we had been dating for a couple of months, had great dates, getting along really well. And then I specifically remember back then I was really, really busy. I had purposely booked myself off every night after work, except for Thursday, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But and then on the weekend, I had all these other commitments, so I was busy, 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 busy. But Thursday night was my veg night,
Mm.
and it was because I used to watch Cheers and LA Law on TV. And I would get takeout food, and I'd stay in my apartment and just enjoy it. And it was my one night where I could just kind of chill.
Mm.
And the phone rings, uh, maybe 15 minutes into my Cheers watching. And it's the girl I was dating at the time. And she is crying on the phone and she's telling me that she's not good enough for me and that her brother, who's not really her brother, it's an adoptive brother, he tried to commit suicide again and this and that. And I'm holding my phone out like this and I'm listening to her, but I'm also thinking to myself, what is wrong with me?
Mm,
Why am I continuing to attract problematic relationships? And what I found in the program was that I was dating younger versions of my dysfunctional mom
mm,
because that's what I learned as a kid. And so, one of the things that helped me recover was being taught how to become your own loving parent.
mm.
And that was powerful. That's a game changer.
I'd love to jump in for a moment if I can. And I so appreciate the clarification because it's interesting. I just noticed a little something about myself too, right? You're like 1990, and as somebody who's not too far off in age from you, I'm like, oh, okay, a couple of years ago, blah, blah, blah. It didn't make sense to me until you clarified for me that it's like, wait a minute. In 1990, I'm literally just now leaving the space of being the child of alcoholics. So
Mm-hmm.
the reason it sounds like the reason you're clarifying is like, no, that really kind of was at the point of comma or in the middle of comma was because I'm just now learning what it means to be this person,
Yeah.
how it that the prior years, these prior 24 years have affected defining me as a person. And now starting
Mm-hmm.
to see how you're not the only person, there's a whole community of folks. And then you kind of started getting into and sharing a little bit of that for us. So I'd love to kind of summarize. So you haven't really told us a whole lot about what it was like growing up
Mm-hmm.
in your household, but you've certainly labeled it. You found this group, this community of people like yourself who had or came from the same type of background. And through the things that you've learned, you started to assess the impact that it's had on your choices, the relationships that you're choosing, and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. So, where I interrupted, we're still back in that, like, I'm 25 ish years old,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just now starting to learn about what it even means to be this person from this type of a background.
Right. Right. And it's the thing is that what was really troubling about my childhood is that I didn't really have a childhood per se because somebody had to be the
Mhm.
adult when you've got this horrendous alcoholism craziness. I mean, for the listeners who care to know, so my low lights, that I would call them, um, that happened to me with so my parents all told when in their lifetimes they accumulated 9 marriages, 7 divorces, and 1 widowing.
Mm,
That included getting married and divorced to each other twice, that Liz Taylor, Richard Burton kind of
mm,
routine. And the crazy thing is that when they got married the first time, they had my sister, got divorced. My dad remarried, got divorced. My parents remarried, had me, got
mm.
divorced. And that means that my sister and I are 100% blood siblings, but from 2 different marriages.
Ah,
So,
interesting.
so I haven't found anybody else like that either. So that's just one thing about it. But sadly, my mom, she could not handle her alcohol, and so one of the things that she did on one of her drunken stupors is when I was 13, she decided that I was an angry teenager and that I must need to get laid. So she fixed me up with a 46-year-old friend.
Mm,
And having that experience, at first you would think, oh, a 13-year-old, go, go, go. But it actually affected me in such a way that I didn't have intimate relationships with another woman for another 11
Mm.
years, not until I turned 24.
If I
And
may, first of all, I
sure.
just want to acknowledge you for that and how difficult that must have been because like I hear you acknowledging that, sometimes people say 13 years old, go, go, go. It's one thing if you're 13 years old and you're following the natural progression of your own development and urges and
Mhm.
exploration, right? I can hear your 13-year-old friends saying that, but you and I both
Mhm.
know, and obviously you're painting a picture for folks, is there are so many things problematic with the way it unfolded for you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Through
and
no
it
fault
and
of
it
your
was
own.
no fault of my own. And as awful as that was, the 46-year-old woman's husband was doing my mom in the other room.
Mm,
So, I mean, it's just so give you an idea about how, screwed up that was. At 14, my drunk mom and drunk stepfather encouraged me to slit my wrists. And so, fortunately, when I saw the blood running down my left wrist, I realized, what am I doing? This is completely wrong. Um, and I just ran into my room and started stabbing the pillow. I must have stabbed it 30, 40
mm,
times in anger because of this. And so many other things, but probably the nail that, the final nail in the coffin was back in 1988. And my stepfather had lost the use of his legs, and had become depressed and decided to commit suicide and made sure that it was me who found him.
mm,
So I understand why he did that, because my mom would have completely gone off the deep end. But it's me who has to forever have that picture in my mind that, even though it was in 1988, I can remember that like it was yesterday.
mm,
And, you know, it, it just, children should not have to deal with that, is basically it. And, you know, um, I actually have a recording of my mom, my drunk mom, at one point, of a tape recording where for whatever reason, on Christmas Eve when I was 12, I recorded her. I interviewed her. And at one point, I asked her, why does she drink so much? And you hear this 12-year-old voice, why do you drink so much? And her answer to me is, do you buy them? I said, no. And she says, well, if you don't buy them, then it's none of your business.
mm, mm,
And a 12-year-old shouldn't be trying to figure that out. And so it really, that, the PTSD that comes from that kind of exposure, um, it, 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 it took years and years to recover from. It really did. And there's 14 traits that a typical, um, they call them ACA, adult children of alcoholics, display. And I had all but a couple of them when I first went into the program. And uh, even to this day, there's still one that still gives me a bit of problems, even though I've worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. Um, but the rest of them are pretty much behind
mm,
me. And, you know, I shouldn't, I wish I wouldn't have had to experience that and have to deal with the recovery of that. But I also understand that it's made me who I am today.
mm,
And, I'm able to reflect back. And when I was raising my kids, I often would, whenever I was faced with some sort of challenge, I would think, okay, what would my mom have done here? Or maybe what would my dad have done here? And I usually selected the opposite
Mm.
answer.
Mm.
It just, because it just wasn't, it, the fact that I came from that family dynamic didn't mean that I wanted to pass that on to my
Sure.
kids.
Sure.
And and it's I tried my best not to pass those characteristics on.
Well, and it's just a huge acknowledgement to you for the difficulty of your childhood. And I could only imagine that of what you've shared with us so far, there was so much more, right? Because it's not like this was just, these milestone events and everything was quiet in between. This is
Mm-mm.
representative of what the day-to-day life is like
Right.
in your family and in that household. And how difficult that has to have been, and as you certainly described. And also I think an acknowledgement too, in that even you tell me, but it seems like even though deep in your gut you knew this wasn't right, this wasn't normal, there's also a limit to how much other exposure you're getting to truly be able to weigh and balance it against. So there's a part of it, it's like, this isn't right. But it's also kind of what I've got,
Mm-hmm. That's
which leaves you sort of holding the bag in a weird metaphorical sort of way, doesn't it?
exactly, and the the way I responded to it as a kid was I pretty much made stories up. We talk about storytelling. I would come up with all
Mm,
these stories to combat what if I had a friend, let's say, that tried to call me, at the home. And because my mom and stepdad drank so much, they had very little money for anything else. They always
mm,
had the money for booze. They always had the money for cigarettes, and then maybe groceries, maybe the rent, maybe utilities. So things, we'd have the power shut off. And I remember there was several times where the telephone would get cut off. And I'd come up with a excuse like, oh, either myself or someone else tripped over the phone cord, back in the day of the landline, and it pulled the cable out of the wall, and that's why when you called there wasn't we couldn't answer.
mm,
Big lie like that. Or I did, if I had dared to bring somebody home, um, often I would come into the living room from the front door, and there was my stepfather passed out on the couch snoring from his drunken stupor, or my mom, same way,
mm,
snoring and stuff. And so I would come up with a story like, oh, they were working really late last night and they're tired, just BS, because I
mm.
was embarrassed about the truth,
Yeah.
so it just, um, eh,
And as a child trying so hard in a way, obviously, to protect you, to make you look normal.
mhm,
Oh, these things aren't as abnormal as they
right,
might seem when you
right,
walk into my home, right?
right.
And yet being forced to protect them in order to protect yourself.
Correct, correct. And it's true. You know, the I remember I would write, I learned how to do my mom's signature. So I would write notes to get me out of school, because I trying to study in that environment, when they were awake, they were fighting. And it just was so distracting. Or they would have the TV on really loud, and they didn't care. There were many times where I'd say, I need to work on something. It doesn't matter. That's your problem. And it was like this bad dream that I was
Mm,
experiencing for so many years. And it just, I I I actually just told myself, okay, if I can get decent grades in school, maybe I can get out of this scenario. And so, with all the drugs and alcohol that were going on around me, I was the only one that stayed clean, because I figured,
mm,
okay, if I, go ahead and start tapping into the bottle like my stepbrother was doing, or getting into the drugs like my stepbrother or stepsister was doing, I would end up in the same situation that everyone else is in. And I didn't want that.
It's an odd sort of gift, right? To have that lens where you just, despite your whole environment working and really, really your whole environment designed to bring you into it as well. And you having this different lens to be able to just see everything in an entirely different light. What a gift that is.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and I reflect back and um, I learned forgiveness. That was a very powerful thing that I learned. And interestingly, um, my mom, she we never talked for the longest time. We didn't talk about what happened. And then back in 2012, I was asked by a former roommate of mine who knew my story. He was putting on an event where he wanted everyday heroes to come up on stage and talk about their story. And I figured, okay, this is going to be the first time that I, mention my story outside of the program.
Mhm.
And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to talk to her about it. And so I remember she used to live maybe 10 miles away from me, and I was all tensed up, and I decided to ride my bike down there and to talk to her about it. And so I did, and I said, I'm going to tell the truth about what happened when I was a kid. And she looked at me, and I was waiting for what she would say, and I had no idea what she was going to say. And then she said, well, if it helps other people, I'm okay with it. And that was
Wow.
a huge, huge weight off of my shoulders. And that came after I was able to forgive her for what happened to me after I saw what a good grandmother she was.
Mm.
She really was very special to my kids. And the fact that she meant so much to my kids before she passed away, that overcame all the negative that happened to me and what she did to me. And
Mm.
so now I look back and I say, well, she did the best she could with what limited parenting capability she had. Um, and I'm very grateful that I my closure with her actually happened over the phone a couple hours before she had a massive stroke. And we were
Mm.
just joking on the phone and had a great conversation. And then the next thing I know, she was in the hospital. Um, and
Wow.
so uh, yeah, so I'm very, very grateful of that. And I
Yeah.
always recommend to people. I had with my dad, he passed, so that was back in 2022. And my dad passed in 2008. And for him, he was in hospice for 3 months before he passed. And
Mhm.
what I had the opportunity to do with him, he and I never really talked, weren't close. So I decided to write him a letter,
Mm.
thanking him for the things that he gave me in terms of my interests and hobbies. And so we had an opportunity to talk about that letter and to just have nice conversations. And for him, I got to see him. He throughout his life he was very depressed. He had a lot of PTSD as a kid too, because he was a only child, and his parents had to escape um, Hitler in Europe. And
Mm.
so it was very traumatizing to him. But he and I got a chance to really be able to talk about everything that needed to be talked about. So when he passed as well, I remember looking at him because he couldn't even talk before he passed, and I held his hand, and he looked me in the eyes, and I looked him back in the eyes, and you could communicate through the eyes, that everything
Mhm.
was going to
Mm.
be okay. And so when I talk to people, I always say, if you had a difficult conversation with someone that didn't end the way that you wanted it to, don't wait to help clarify or
Mm,
clear the air, because you don't
mm.
want that to be the last interaction you have with a person. So
And it says something about you too. I mean, obviously there was a lot of time involved in what you're describing, right? But that, for you to be able to acknowledge your parents and step parents for what they were, what they had, what they were dealing with, who they were, and then, this sort of element of redemption, before they passed,
mhm.
to some degree or another, the empathy on your part, and also we won't get into it because this is your story, not theirs, but something or some things must have changed for them over time as well,
Mhm.
which I would assume kind of contributed to your openness
Yeah.
to this space.
Yeah, it was, because it was interesting. My stepfather, he uh so he was an alcoholic from the age of 13, apparently. He was a former vaudeville child entertainer.
Hmm.
And so that's what you did. You drank and you smoked. And so that's what he did. And uh, he was somebody who overnight would drink a half gallon, those grocery store bourbons and vodkas. He'd go through one a night,
Mm,
one a night. That's not including all
mm,
the other drinks he was having during the day. Crazy. I mean, I can't imagine the amount of calories, and he was just a skinny guy, but
malnourished.
malnourished. And
Hmm.
but so he got his fourth DUI. I remember in December, prior to the new rule going into effect in California, where Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, if you had a prior DUI, you would immediately go for 6 months in prison.
Hmm.
And so, in his classic fashion, being drunk, he started being a smartass to the cops, and they decided
Mm,
to put him in the Oakland City jail overnight to dry out. And he had a cellmate who scared the heck out of him, saying that basically he's lucky it's December, not January. If the two of them were going to go to the jail and and be there for 6 months, that he would be his girlfriend, kind of thing. It scared the
mm,
heck out of him.
mm,
So he dried out. He went through a detox. I didn't think he was going to survive it, but he went through a detox that was horrible. I mean, it was very similar to, I believe there's a movie from the 1950s called The Lost Weekend. Ray Milland won an Academy Award for Best Actor for it, and it's basically an alcoholic that goes through detox, and he
mhm,
was hallucinating, things like that, and that's exactly what my stepfather was doing. But after he got through that, it was the first time being around him in, you know, oh gosh, 15 years, where I actually liked him.
mm,
Because
mhm,
before he would call me a punk. I would call him a drunk, and he'd say, yeah, he always loved this line. He always said, yeah, but in the morning, I'll be sober. You'll still be a punk. He thought that was
mm,
the funniest thing in the world. Um, so I actually felt like, okay, this is a step dad, not a stepfather.
mhm,
And for about a year, we got along great. And then he started having the problems with his legs that
mhm,
deteriorated fairly rapidly. But he, being clean for the first time in his life was, I found out how much more witty he was.
yeah,
And my mom actually stopped drinking too, because
mm,
she would just drink with him, and
yeah,
so she wasn't drinking either, and so it was, for the first time for at least a year, there was a bit of normalcy that
mm,
was
mm,
going on, which was refreshing. And I was able to, one thing that he passed on to me as that vaudeville performer is he had probably over at least 100+ jokes. And so those jokes he passed on to me, which I've passed on to my kids. I still
Hmm.
tell some of them to this day. And
Nice.
so, even though we really only had a short time as, you know, positive experience, I have a lifelong gift from him that he gave me. So,
Yeah. Pete, I can hear how meaningful, this experience has been. I want to ask the second question. I feel like you've already answered it, but in case there's anything else you would add to it. The second question is, as you look back to this comma that you were sitting on, what did it create for you?
oh,
What else would you add here?
uh, it gave me hope. It really gave me hope. It also allowed me to find somebody who was not a crazy person to date. Um, I dealing with a total chaotic mother. Um, what the program taught me was, you shouldn't date that kind of person. Now, the one mistake I made was, if you think about like a pendulum, and the pendulum swinging, what ended up happening is I was all the way on one side of the pendulum, and I looked for somebody on the opposite side of the pendulum,
Mm,
where I should have been more in the middle. But the person that I found, I was married to her for 20 years, and we raised two beautiful kids together. So I don't regret that marriage. But had I been able to really kind of think through, and as I was loving myself more, it probably would have been better to have gone more in the middle, because there were some things about my mom that were good qualities,
mm,
and I just shied away from all of those. I just wanted a clean slate completely, because the programming I
sure.
had was just so chaotic. And so I think just that hope that, yeah, I can get through this, and there is a good life waiting for me around the corner. And
Mm,
that really was good, because, as I mentioned before, I was on a fast, slippery slope to self-destruction. I really was.
mm.
So,
Well, let's take that and spring off of that and go into our third question, which is, you just acknowledged on a fast slope to self-destruction. And also, as you look at the whole story you've shared with us, what did you learn about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma?
oh, I learned how resilient I was. That was one that was I really patted myself on the back, because all of the chaos going on, and I could still get through, get my high school degree, get my college degree, get my master's degree, without ever dealing with what was going on there. I just kept on persevering. And so, being able to rise above that, and knowing that I don't have to let I don't have to let what's going on around me dictate what I have to, what's going to become of me. I
Hmm.
basically took the bull by the horns, and I just got to get out of here. And I remember, it's kind of funny. After I graduated high school, before I graduated high school, I had taken a job with Radio Shack. And so I was working as an assistant manager at Radio Shack. And I thought, well, I'm making money. Back then. It was minimum wage, $3.35 an hour. Um, and I came up with this idea that maybe I should just work and not worry about school, because I'm making money right now. Why do I need this college degree? And thank
Hmm.
goodness I had two of my high school buddies who said, "Are you crazy?" And one of them said, "Do you really, really like working at Radio Shack?" And I said, "Not really." He says, "Well, do you want to work there for the rest of your life?" And I said, "No." And he says, "Well, you better get your degree." And so,
Mm.
so it was good that I had friends who cared about me and knew, of course, knew about my background and were there to support me. And the other thing that I learned about this too is that your family, just who you have as your family, is not who should define you. And that my friends throughout the years, that's the family I choose,
Mm.
not the people I'm related to. And that's a big difference. So I have a lot of gratitude for the friends that I've had, both past and present. And it's a gift. Friendship is a gift.
It is, and I just want to acknowledge the fact that you've said a couple of different times now. I don't know if you realized it, but you would say friends, and you would describe them, and you would kind of throw in who knew about my background.
Mhm.
And what I'm taking from that is like the friends that you can trust, the friends who know your whole story, the friends who embrace you with that story.
Yes.
And so in that there's the acknowledgement of the support system that you had and the family of choice that you had. And also I hear a little bit of a call to action in there. It's like, being able to trust the people in your life that you trust with everything that you can entrust them with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting for me because of my background. I used to, the friends that I had when I was younger, um, we used to call ourselves the Island of Misfit Toys from the Rudolph the Red-Nosed
Mm-hmm.
Reindeer cartoon. And
Mm-hmm.
it was really true because the friends I had, we all had some oddity or more than one oddity. And so, my friends were not the, high school cheerleaders, the football captains, anything like that. No, farthest from the truth. It was the oddballs. And it was
Mm-hmm.
because we got it. We got each other. It's
It's so interesting, right? Because usually folks end up on that island because they've been excluded from the other groups,
mhm.
right? And the people I'm totally making this up, right? It's my story, but um, the people in the groups who choose to exclude others think that they're truly excluding them, and all they're doing is pushing them into a better group.
Yes, exactly. And we wore that Island of Misfit Toys with pride. We really did. It was like, we
Hmm.
didn't care. We still, we had our great experiences. We were there for each other. And I
Authentic, it
authentic.
seems
I
like.
look back and one of the things that's wonderful is when you think back on some good times, and I laugh about it. I smile about it, frequently. And I'm so grateful for it. I really am, because had I not had my friends, who knows if I would have been here now. I sincerely doubt it. I probably would have committed suicide, because I had a
Mm.
lot of thoughts of that when I didn't like myself. And being able to have those friends who I could count on, that I could hang out with. I could go to the movies with. I could go to a baseball game with, just hang out. Just hang out and watch TV, whatever it was.
Yeah,
It was so beneficial.
just be with
Yeah.
each other. And you acknowledged again the path that you were on. The fourth question, Pete, is as you look back at this comma you've been describing to us, again, I feel like you've answered this a little bit, but the question is what changed for you?
Mm.
Or what is continuing to change for you as a result of sitting on this comma?
It's interesting. I would say that, well, like I said, it gave me, instead of taking the negative attitude towards life, I became a much more positive person. But it also um, allowed me to really just be okay with myself. The I learned back probably, yeah, not long after my comma, um, I learned, and I still go, I have this as a reminder. It's, that I have it on my monitor, and it's that I'm not pizza. I'm not going to be liked by everyone. I always like
Mm,
to remind myself of that, because one of the problems that I had growing up is that I tried to be a people pleaser. And a people pleaser is not something that's you're going to grow from. And I would try and be the people pleaser because I didn't want chaos going on. So I always tried to, get people to calm down, try and get them to calm down or do whatever they want to make people happy. And it just, I was continuously putting others in front of me. And
mm,
um, and when I learned to think of it as I'm not pizza, I'm not going to be liked by everyone, it made such a big difference. In fact, I remember um, when I used to, when I was first starting to teach college classes, and, I would teach, a class would have 40 students, and they'd give us they would do the evaluation of the class at the end, and we would see those, several weeks after the class got done. And I would go through, and of the 40 uh, reviews, literally 39 would say this was a great class. This was the best class I ever had. And then of course I'd get somebody who said I
mhm,
didn't like this class. And the old me would go, oh, where did I fail? And
mm,
ignore the
mm.
39 out of 40 that said they really liked it. And it taught me that, you know what? I wasn't pizza for that person. It's okay. It just, I'm not their cup of tea.
Yeah.
It is a very calming thing from that as well, because, if we're okay with the fact that there's going to be people who don't like us, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, and it happens all the time now. I mean, um, I'm sure, everybody's had on social media a troll that says something negative on a post maybe that you do. And the fact of the matter is, um, you're not pizza for that person. And I
Mhm,
remember the very first time I got a troll, a really bad troll. It was on LinkedIn, as a matter of fact. And I asked a couple of my friends, I said, do you know this guy? And, and a couple of them knew him because that's all he did. This guy would go and he would just troll people. He got his jollies off of being really negative to others. And one of my friends said, congratulations, you must be doing something right, because when you start
mm,
attracting the trolls, that your message is getting out there.
mhm.
So
Interesting.
it was a great way to think about it, a great reframe.
Yeah. Pete, last of the five questions is what does getting off the comma look like for you?
Oh, it it gives me a sense that I did right. Um, I I followed my path the way it was supposed to be followed. And I still have a ways to go. God willing, I've got, I'm almost 60 now, but I've got one grandchild, and who knows if I'm going to have more grandchildren in the future. But I now feel like, the thing I'm having the best decades of my life. Before, if I was to say, well, was, my first decade, 1 to 10, better than my second decade? Absolutely not. And was
Mm,
my, third decade better than my second decade? Probably not. But now my 30th, 40th, and 50th, they've been better than the previous
mm, mm,
decade. And I feel like getting off of the comma has allowed me to do that. And that's not to say everything's been great. There's been a lot of heartbreak, and but the fact is that the experiences that I have now, I tend to appreciate them more. Great
Mhm.
example of one is, you know, uh, when COVID hit, and I never took going to a restaurant as something, you know, that was so special. But when you couldn't go to a restaurant, then when it was brought back and we could go, I still do that, even though it's been several years. When I go to a restaurant, I enjoy the atmosphere. And so,
Mhm.
like, I remember having a meal not too long ago with another couple, and the service was taking a little longer than it was supposed to. And one of them just said, "Oh, I can't believe how long it's taking," and stuff like that. Hey, I just said, "But we're here, we're experiencing, we're together, we're having fun. It's no big deal." And it's just,
Mhm.
it's a whole different perspective that,
Yeah.
you know, when when I um when I was on that slippery slope, everything was negative. It was, I didn't like myself. I hated life. I didn't like my job. I didn't want, I didn't, I was alienating myself from my friends. It just wasn't who I wanted to be.
Mhm.
And now I really do like who I've become. And I feel like I got a gift that I was able
Mhm.
to turn it around as opposed to wasting what was given to me.
And that's definitely what I'm hearing kind of surface. These aren't necessarily your words, it's just a reflection, but this sense of kind of appreciation, gratitude.
Mhm.
Definitely, you've acknowledged calm, and it just comes across like you've come from the chaos and created the calm life that you want, is what it seems like I'm also hearing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not to say that every now and then something will get under my skin. It
Sure.
does, but
Can't
I
possibly
have the
compare to
ability.
what your first 2 decades were
Not,
like, right?
no, not even close. And now I actually have the mental fortitude that I think, okay, I can feel my stress level going up, and I think, okay, what can I do to not let this
Mhm.
you know, get me upset? And um, and most of the time I'm able to do that, and it's just it's really, it's helped me because when I was letting stress get to me, I was aging so rapidly.
Mhm.
In fact, when I ended up with stress-induced diabetes back in 2008, I mean, if you were to see a picture of me when I was diagnosed, and you see me now, other than a little bit more gray, I actually look younger today than I looked
Mhm.
back, what was that, 16 years ago?
Mhm.
That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. And that's what stress does to us.
Mhm.
It ages us rapidly. And so I feel like, you know what? It's up to me. The reality is, uh, a situation is only going to stress me out as much as I let it stress me out. And so, I feel like I've been empowered, and I feel like, that I can pass this knowledge and stuff on to others, and hopefully, others don't let the negative things that are going on in their lives affect them long term. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, that doesn't have to be the story that you end up telling.
Mhm.
You can tell a different story.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, or like in your case, as you've modeled for us before we wrap things up, is, whatever does happen to you, let it affect you in a way that you want it to affect you, right?
Mhm.
Like it,
Right.
it can affect you negatively, or it could affect you positively, and that you can control that narrative to one degree or another.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in the universe wanting to give us whatever we're asking for. So I have really been good about making sure to send positive energy out. Like, for example, you know, a great, something that everybody can relate to is the running late for an appointment
Hmm.
and you start stressing about it. What usually happens? Oh, you're going to get more red lights. You're going to get more traffic,
Hmm.
whatever it happens to be. It's, that's what happens because what we're doing is we're all stressed out, worried about it. We're sending that negative energy out there, and the universe doesn't know positive or negative energy. It only knows what you're asking. So if you're saying, "Oh, I got to make this red light," oh, you want a red light?
Hmm.
It's going to give
Hmm.
it to you. So now what I do is whenever I'm driving someplace, for example, each green light I get, I actually say thank you, thank
Hmm.
you, thank you.
Hmm.
Or something that went my way. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because I want to send out that positive energy because I want to attract back
Yeah.
that same positive energy. And it works. It
Nice.
really does.
Nice. Pete, let's wrap it up. So, thank you for sharing your story with us today. And I know there was a great deal in there that was very sensitive and very personal. And so I so appreciate your vulnerability and your trust in us today as your listeners. And so, for folks who want to learn more about you, like look you up, what are you working on? Where could they contact you if they wanted to reach you? I'll put it all in the show notes so people can click the links. But walk us through, where can folks find Pete?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is my website, petealexander.com. That's the easiest one to look at that link. It also has all of my social media connections. It also has my TEDx talk. It has my book. It has my videos that I've done on stress relief. So all those things, by all means, take a look, check them out. Hopefully, you benefit from it, like something. That I appreciate that.
Nice, nice, cool. And like I said, those links are there. So everybody go and click on the link that speaks to you. And one thing we also do, Pete, before we wrap up is I do it for every episode because you showing up today and sharing your story the way you have is really what we stand for here, is that we can learn from each other, that people don't have to be celebrities and millionaires, and that we
Mhm.
don't have to tell people what they need to take from the story, that the sharing of the story, people will come and take off the plate what resonates with them. We can't leave your story incomplete without asking you, who in your life would you like to give a voice to? So I call this section acknowledgments, and it's all about
Mhm.
giving voice to, boosting, lifting up others, and making sure that they get a little, time in the spotlight too. So it can be causes, organizations, other creators, or even just people in your life. Who would you like to acknowledge today? And I'll make sure those descriptions and links go in the show notes as well.
Sure. There's three organizations that come to my mind. First one, because we talked so much about it during our episode, Paul, is adultchildren.org. And that's the Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families organization. If anything resonated with you listeners that you want to learn more, that's the site to take a look at. I always recommend the best two pieces of literature there are the problem and the solution.
Mm.
And if those resonate with you, and then maybe the third one would be the 14 traits, then it's time to maybe check out a meeting either online or in person. So that's one that I absolutely want to acknowledge. Second one is the Mentoring Club. It is a mentoring organization that helps young people in their careers to be able to tap into those more savvy veterans to help them make the proper decisions in order to either get a promotion or they're running their own businesses. They're on, they're solopreneurs
Mhm.
that need some help to build their businesses more, and so that organization does a wonderful job with both the mentors and the mentees. They both get a wonderful benefit. I've been a mentor for them for a long time, and I've really appreciate what they do. And the third one is the Hospice of the East Bay. And the reason I want to give them voice is twofold. They were the subject or the beneficiary organization when my son was doing his Eagle project as a Boy Scout. And they were a wonderful organization to work with. But then going full circle, back in 2022, when my mom had her massive stroke, she spent her last days at Hospice of the East Bay, and they took wonderful care of her before she passed, and were very, very supportive. And so I definitely want to acknowledge them as well.
Some powerful acknowledgments. It sounds like some powerful organizations, and the Hospice of the East Bay is in your area, right? You're in the Seattle area.
No, Hospice of the East Bay is actually in the Bay Area.
Okay,
too.
okay,
so
good.
I'm in Seattle area. I remotely manage the landscaping business now. So yeah.
Point is still the same, is even if you're not in the Bay Area, or even if that's not either of these acknowledgments isn't somebody with a nationwide or a global reach, folks can look at these sites and either they're accessible to them because they're local, or go find local versions of them in your own community as well.
Absolutely.
Pete, thank you so much. So much in your story that resonated with me. You and I are going to have a powerful debrief after we stop recording. I just want to thank you again for opening up and sharing your story with everyone. And with all of our gratitude, have a wonderful rest of your week.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for having me on your show, and I really appreciate the listeners' time as well.
Have a great one.
Thank you.
What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma, and feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.